All right. This one is very interesting. I don't usually talk about a whole lot of relationship legal issues because I'm not a family law attorney. Sometimes there are other things that crop up, though, between people. If you recall a while back, I did cover the whole Tiger Woods Erica Herman situation where there was a non-disclosure agreement. He sort of kicked her out and she sort of wanted $30 million.
Yeah.
But Bill de Blasio and his wife, Chirlane McCray, are now separating according to a New York Times article. Apparently, they sat down and did this full thing. And I'm just sort of like, who does that? But okay, that's New York. While this whole thing is sort of interesting, there are a few legal issues that can pop up here. Now, it sounds like they are uncoupling in a very, how shall I say, friendly sort of way. Their children, I think, are still around. They're just in their early 20s. And so this is a way to maintain some semblance of a family unit. And that might, in fact, be a really good thing. I do think, though, that they probably are going to sit down and, sort of hash out and go through, hey, what the expectations are of this arrangement. It probably isn't going to be a permanent thing, but it sounds like it's where they are at this point in time. Now, I want to go back and talk about Tiger Woods and his situation first. I'm going to come back and talk about this. And then what does any of this have to do with you? Because I want to talk about that also. Now, let me, before I get to this New York Times article, let me talk about Tiger Woods for a second, for those of you who may not recall what was going on. I have my notes here because it's been a while since I talked about this. So he had been dating Erica Herman. She moved into his place. Now, his place was actually deeded to a trust. So the house that he was in, it wasn't in his name, it was in the name of the trust. Well, they had also signed a non-disclosure agreement. Well, she had signed a non-disclosure agreement saying she wasn't going to divulge and all of that sort of thing. She was then claiming that there was 6 more years left on her unwritten lease agreement with him. And I tell you, some of this just sort of didn't really make any sense to me, but that's what she was claiming. And she wanted $30 million, which I don't know how you come to $30 million. I wanted this to go to, court just so that I could figure out how she came up with $30 million. But anyway, that's what she wanted. They did not have a cohabitation agreement in place. That might have saved both of them a lot of headache. I think sometimes people might think, well, yeah, it'll save Tiger, but it can save her too, because you go through that process as two people trying to figure out what will work best for both of you. And then you sit down and you kind of have some give and take and you come to some sort of agreement. So that could have been something that could have helped both of them so that they didn't wind up in this situation where she's suing him and then their counter suits. I guess the trust was intervening or something. It just all got very complicated until the judge said, no, the NDA is going to be in effect. Go back and take care of it under that. Well, that's them, okay? De Blasio is in a different situation because they are married. And so there are certain rights that come into play here. But this is now a different scenario because yes, they're sort of separating, but they're living under the same roof. I don't know how many of you would want to do that. I find it somewhat interesting, but again, it's a way to sort of keep the family unit together. Now, the best way forward with them on this is to come to some sort of agreement about what the expectations are going to be. Who's currently paying what bills? Will that person continue to take care of the bills that way? What happens if there is maintenance? They had some work done on their property a few years ago, and are there some things that still need to be paid toward that? How is this all going to work going forward? I think that they will likely sit down and sort of try to come to some sort of arrangement, especially if they sat down in an article with the New York Times and sort of gave all of this information about, yeah, it's not quite working anymore, and you can tell. That's them. I want to go to this article for just a second so that you can actually see what I'm talking about here. So this is the article that was in the New York Times. And I really want to scroll down to a couple of things that I think really sort of highlight what was going on or where they are now in this. Not really interested in the personal part, but this part, because this is a part that sort of brings up the legal issues here when it says they're separating, they're not planning to divorce. So it doesn't sound like anyone's going to be running out to their attorney and saying, you know, we're going to get a divorce. But it says here, but will date other people. Now, again, this brings us back to this sort of agreement that I'm talking about. There's some sort of uncoupling that's going on here, but what does that look like? And, you know, is there going to be some sort of agreement that says, hey, we aren't going to bring people that we're seeing back to the house where the other party is. We're going to be respectful. And of course, our children too, we're maybe not going to bring this person around them. You know, these would be the things that they would want to talk about. So it says here they're not planning to divorce, they said, but will date other people. They will continue to share the Park Slope townhouse. So they're both going to be living there. They say they're both going to be sharing it. And the expectation is they're going to figure out what the sharing is going to look like. So I'm assuming there's only one kitchen in there. How do you share the kitchen? Who gets what bedrooms? I'm assuming there are maybe 1 or 2 extra bedrooms that allow them to have this freedom. You know, most people don't want to uncouple quite like this. And if they do, they may not necessarily have all of this room in their house where people can now live under the same roof, but sort of live separately. So this, again, file this under interesting, file this under most people can't do this. Good luck to you guys. We're wishing you the best. Now it says here, they will continue to share the Park Slope townhouse where they raise their 2 children. They're on their 20s. Yeah, in this last part, I'm sort of like, why do we write things like that? So that's sort of the interesting piece, legal piece, that comes out of this article when I'm thinking about, okay, they're uncoupling, but they're still going to sort of stay together here. We'll see how that goes. They're not planning to divorce. I read that as they're not planning to divorce right now. Like they're not running out to do something right now. And that on their own time frame, they will figure things out. But for you, now let's talk about you, because a lot of times people live together before they get married. And I want to go down a list of some things that people really may want to consider, because like I said, I think this is what caught Tiger Woods and Erica Herman off guard. It's like, how do we uncouple when we aren't legally coupled through some sort of civil union or a legal marriage? Because at least in those cases, the rights are kind of there and you can figure things out and you work sort of through the judicial system. When you don't have that, it's best to sit down and have a cohabitation agreement that tells you who's going to be responsible for what and what the expectations are going to be. Now, I've heard people say that these things can include everything from, you know, who's going to do what chores and who's going to pay what bills to how often people are going to have sex. Well, these things are entirely up to the individuals. But traditionally, people really want to look at the costs and expenses of being together. Utilities, maintenance, insurance, who's going to be responsible for what chores. For instance, is there grass in a yard and a lawn to be kept up? What about property ownership? If you're living in a property, is it leased or both parties' names on the lease? What happens if the parties then decide to separate? Who gets to stay on the lease? Who has to move out? You know? What if they've taken on debt or loans? How is that going to be divided? You know, so there are lots of things to consider here. In some cases, you know, you may have pets. Pets can sometimes be the biggest thorn in trying to uncouple. They can figure out who is going to get the dishes and the bedroom sets, but they cannot come to any sort of agreement on who's going to have primary custody of the family pet. Like that becomes the biggest issue. So having these conversations beforehand can definitely go a long way in helping with that. So I know a lot of people stay together before getting married, and some people don't really intend to get married. And so for those people, it's the same sort of thing. Put a cohabitation agreement in place so that you don't have to worry about what things are going to look like in the event that things go sideways. Now, one of the things I frequently tell people is, hey, look, an agreement is not going to cover everything. You're never going to think of every circumstance that could pop up. Remember, we had a pandemic and nobody really planned or thought about that in advance. So don't think that you're going to cover everything with this cohabitation agreement. But if you're working with an experienced family law attorney, usually that person has enough knowledge that they can put together something to fit your circumstance that will pretty much cover most of what could go wrong. But we're human, right? So sometimes we're going to leave things out. So that's it. Again, de Blasio and his wife are separating. They're going to stay in the same house. We're assuming they're going to figure things out in some sort of written agreement here. And maybe it's a good thing for the family at this point in time. Maybe there's something for people to learn about how to separate with respect or something. I don't know. But if that helps you out, that helps you understand more about cohabitation agreements and what you should have in place, please go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Don't forget to hit the notification bell, and peace.